How you guys all doing? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiaga, coming to you live today on June 13th, coming towards the end of the week, but still another round of great NFL stories to talk about on today's episode. We're going to start off with the biggest topic, in my opinion, Aaron Rodgers missing the entirety of the Jets mandatory minicamp. Why that is and my thoughts on it are coming up in just a few seconds. Also, the NFL finally announced the tampering situation punishments handed out to the Atlanta Falcons and the Philadelphia Eagles. Stay tuned to find out what those were. And also later on, we're going to talk about Travis Kelce and him talking about his future. After extending with the Kansas City Chiefs, what does his future look like? Potentially a soon-to-be retirement coming towards the horizon of his career. Stick around to know more about those topics and a lot more on today's show. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. And also, if you have any question or comment you want to make on today's episode, please use the tip and donations link you see on your screen, gsmcpodcast.net. By using that, I'll be able to see your question and read it on air, and that way, get a feel for what you guys are thinking and your guys' perspective on anything I say or on any of the topics on hand. It's a massive help for this show and also the network, so please, if you guys could, use the tip and donations link again, gsmcpodcast.net. But, but now moving on to the first topic, like I mentioned, we have Aaron Rodgers and his absence from mandatory minicamp. It was revealed, or Robert Saleh, I should say, revealed it to everybody. He let everyone know that Rodgers' absence on Tuesday was for an unexcused reasoning there, but people thought it was only going to be just for Tuesday. Robert Saleh went up there and sort of clarified why Aaron Rodgers wasn't there. Then The Athletic reported, and they revealed that Aaron Rodgers was actually going to be out for the entirety of this week of the mandatory minicamp period for the New York Jets. And Robert Saleh sort of alluded to this back on Tuesday. A lot of people might not have picked up on it, but in his comments on Tuesday, Robert Saleh said that he hinted at this possibility when he mentioned Tyrod Taylor. And from the practice on Tuesday, he said that Tyrod might have the opportunity to run the 2-minute offense today, meaning Tuesday, and also tomorrow, yesterday on Wednesday. So there was those comments, and also Robert Saleh mentioning how the reason why Aaron Rodgers wasn't there was because of a previously scheduled event that was, in quotes, important to him, according to Robert Saleh. And of course, the fines for an unexcused absence from mandatory minicamp will total up to over $100,000 for Aaron Rodgers. Not that that's the biggest issue that I have with it, or not the biggest issue overall with this situation, but it's just, one, it was very unexpected, obviously. No one leading up to this point would have thought that Aaron Rodgers had any conflict or any sort of situation with being at mandatory minicamp, but also because he has shown up for the voluntary portion of it, he didn't have to be there for OTAs or the other stuff beforehand, but he seemed to be doing a lot more, going above and beyond and being there because he missed all of last season. So you would think he needs that extra time, get accustomed to everybody, get everything back in the flow, especially coming off of an Achilles injury. You need that extra time, I would think, to really feel 100%. Even with all the experience that Aaron Rodgers has, I think that was still important. And that's sort of where my issues come about with all of this, because one, when Robert Saleh mentioned this on Tuesday, when it first came out to everybody, he said he didn't specify what the event was. He just said it was something that was important to Aaron Rodgers, so it was an unexcused absence still, and that already sounds a little fishy, right? Because if you're going to excuse him and sort of allow him to do something like this, you would think you would at least excuse it and understand that this is something worth missing mandatory minicamp about. But because it was still unexcused and he didn't really reveal anything as to why, that already seemed a bit fishy to me. If Robert Saleh really didn't know, or if he did know and just didn't want to say because it would paint Aaron Rodgers in a bad picture, that already is a negative sort of feeling around that, this whole situation with Rodgers not being there. And then you move on. I hear other reports from other sources around it. I think Colin Cowherd said it on his show that Rodgers had a previously scheduled vacation or just a trip, maybe not a vacation, but just something else planned away, maybe from the United States or from New York. I don't know the specifics of it, but I heard Colin Cowherd say that on his show, and if that is to be the case, one, obviously scheduling it ahead of time, like I assume he did, this vacation, planning it ahead of time, you would think, you would see that it would clash with mandatory minicamps. So I don't know. Maybe you still plan it on that, or you really did forget. And once the moment comes, I would probably feel like you would choose to stay for mandatory minicamp. Again, I do know that this is Aaron Rodgers we're talking about. He doesn't necessarily need these extra reps and extra work to put in for himself, but I'll come back to that in just a second. But at the end of the day, looking at these two situations, if you have double booked this or if you do have these overlapping events, one, I would probably think that maybe you would choose mandatory minicamp, like I said before, and then maybe your trip, depending on what it is, we don't know, and that's really none of our business to know what this other event is. But again, if it's an unexcused absence and you communicated it with Robert Saleh, like he made it seem, that Rodgers and him had a dialogue to maybe specify what this event was. If it was important and Robert Saleh, didn't make a big deal about it, you could review it and then make it an excused absence. If Robert Saleh is hiding it, then that also isn't a positive thing for this entire situation. If Saleh doesn't want to reveal what this event is, maybe because it really isn't worth missing mandatory minicamp for that reason. But again, we don't know the specifics of that. That's Aaron Rodgers' business. But where I think most people, and I still have a bit of a problem with this, is that it now ineffectively or just symbiotically is the word I'm looking for, affects everybody else, and I'll explain why, is because, like I mentioned before, maybe Rodgers doesn't need these extra reps, maybe he doesn't necessarily need to learn the playbook a little bit more, or because he was there at the voluntary portion, he could sort of, it could be okay for him to miss this mandatory part, right? But in saying that, it's not just all about him. Of course he makes everything go, he is the crucial piece to everything, but because he's not there, of course, maybe it doesn't affect him, but it affects everybody around him. And that, I think, is the bigger picture. And the biggest issue I have with this, because with Rodgers not being there, okay, maybe you don't have to be, but then everybody else now, the receivers have to get throws by a different quarterback. Now the offensive line has to protect somebody else who doesn't have the same movement as you. And the defense has to play against somebody else, maybe not at the quality of that level. So maybe they could be a little bit easier for them. I don't know. But that's one thing. And then on the other hand, outside of football and how it is perceived by everybody else, it makes it seem almost like, and I'm not unaware of the fact that Aaron Rodgers will probably realistically get different treatment than the second string receiver, than the second string defensive back, and even the starting running back and Breece Hall or maybe Garrett Wilson. Aaron Rodgers will obviously and realistically get a better treatment than those guys, even if nobody wants to admit it. That's the reality of it all. That in mind, it sort of paints Rodgers out in a very weird negative light, just because you're getting an unexcused absence, one, so it doesn't mean it's okay, but you're still doing it anyway. Sort of paints the picture that he is almost above what these rules and regulations are for the New York Jets and all these other players. And if other players see Rodgers doing this, and the message is, like it is with most teams, everybody's treated equally, then it almost paints the picture that these rules aren't really set in stone and they can be bypassed by almost anybody. If it doesn't apply to Aaron Rodgers, you don't want to make it seem like he's above everybody else, then it implies to everybody, and it doesn't make the rules or these regulations that run the New York Jets organization that solidified, and that paints the organization in a bad picture. And again, it just sets a bad example to go along with that last point. And at the end of the day also, it just creates an outside of football storyline that, again, Aaron Rodgers doesn't have to care about, quite honestly. He doesn't have to worry about or fear it, for a lack of a better terms, that he is creating outside noise, but he can't create that or just not be aware of the fact that this is going to be a headline from now probably until training camp, and still come in and think like nothing really is happening, that it wasn't such a big deal, because this is also Aaron Rodgers who said a few months back, or really at the start of the offseason, towards really the end of last season, that in quotes, he said, "The BS that has nothing to do with winning needs to get out of this building." He said that back towards the end of last season, and you can't say that and then have a situation like this pop up where it almost seems like it was just very unorthodox, unexpected, that, hey, you popped in and said, "I'm not going to be here this week. Sorry, I had something else planned." It almost seems, and it's painted out to be like that. And that is just it's just hypocritical when people see that quote and then you're doing something like this. It doesn't paint a good picture for Aaron Rodgers and this New York Jets team. And again, it just creates more outside noise that this team definitely doesn't need. They don't need extra motivation to have the media create outside stories about them. The media can do it pretty well on their own, but now Aaron Rodgers is giving them more of a reason to do that. And when he comes back, I doubt he really answers the question when they ask him, but also now with this, he has to answer to that, focus on stuff outside of football, and it's not really a great look to end mandatory minicamp, where they have such good and exciting pieces and storylines to talk about, like Malachi Corley stepping up, the offensive line hopefully getting better and more healthy as this mandatory period goes on, the defense getting another year of experience, how good are they performing, Sauce Gardner, Garrett Wilson becoming even more of an elite talent than they already were. But it's all superseded by Aaron Rodgers and everybody talking about now, where's Aaron Rodgers? Why isn't he there? Why are the Jets allowing this? Is this going to be a distraction all year? How good is the chemistry going to be when they reach training camp and into the regular season? All of that now jumps to the top of the headline instead of all the other positive things that could come from the Jets. And it's a shame that, that it is happening. I don't want to believe that Rodgers is selfish or anything like that, but I think he just should have been more aware of what the negatives could be with this, and scheduling this event, vacation, whatever it may be, with mandatory minicamp on the same date. If it came down to choosing one, I probably would have chosen mandatory minicamp, knowing all the other factors that could come along with it. But Aaron Rodgers has been doing this for a while. He is sort of a master of trolling the media now and having fun with it. So I'm looking forward to see what he answers when he comes back or the next time somebody asks him about it. But for now, we will take a break from this segment and leave it there. We're going to head to our first break of the show, and when we return, we're going to talk about the NFL finally coming down with a punishment to the Atlanta Falcons and not the Philadelphia Eagles for the tampering allegations that happened towards the start of free agency. I'll inform you guys on what that punishment was and why the Philadelphia Eagles did not receive a punishment along with the Atlanta Falcons. That is coming up right after this break. Don't go anywhere.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on their face shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
We are back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to continue with our next segment. We finally got an answer on this NFL tampering situation that has been going on since the beginning of March. Up until now, the NFL has been pretty quiet about it, and has not really shown any sort of movement with this situation going on. It's been months now with other reports coming out saying that it was going to happen this week, and then it was going to happen the next week, and then probably it was going to happen last week, but nothing happened. And now it sort of just pops up out of nowhere, and the NFL didn't make too big of a deal about it because the punishment wasn't that severe at the end of the day. If you needed a little bit of catching up, the Philadelphia Eagles and the Atlanta Falcons were being investigated by the NFL for potentially tampering in their acquisitions of Saquon Barkley for the Eagles and for the acquisition of Kirk Cousins for the Atlanta Falcons. First, I'll give you guys the punishment, and then I'll sort of fill you guys in with the rest of the information. The final verdict for the Atlanta Falcons was the more severe one because they actually got a punishment and the Eagles did not. The Atlanta Falcons were stripped of their 2025 fifth round pick and were fined $250,000 as a team, and their general manager Terry Fontenot was also fined $50,000 towards himself, whereas the Eagles came away from this unscathed. They had no punishment because the NFL, after a lengthy investigation into their emails, text messages, and just conversations between general manager Howie Roseman, Saquon Barkley, Penn State coach James Franklin, the NFL concluded that they found no evidence of any potential tampering actions between the two parties directly during the 52-hour tampering period before free agency officially begins. And the rules are with the tampering period, that those 52 hours before free agency actually starts, the other teams can make direct contact with any player's agent. So it has to be a secondary source there. Unless the player is representing himself, that's the only way these other teams, if you are a free agent, can contact you if you're representing yourself directly. But if you do have an agent, during the tampering period, only your agent can meet with other teams, and that line of communication can only be held between the agent and opposing teams. And because of that, the Falcons were fined and were stripped of their fifth round pick, and the Eagles came away really with no harm being done. They really just had nothing be done to them with this punishment. And now I'll sort of get into each situation, why this was carried out for a while. We'll start with the Philadelphia Eagles. It was just really all a big misunderstanding, it appears, because the investigation really started and it raised a lot of eyebrows when Saquon Barkley's former coach, his college coach, James Franklin, the head coach still at Penn State University, he commented on a conversation he had with Saquon Barkley about signing with the Philadelphia Eagles, and he implied that Saquon had a direct conversation with general manager Howie Roseman of the Philadelphia Eagles before free agency officially started, and he sort of pitched them this idea of this being Howie Roseman, that coming back to Philadelphia, playing for the Eagles, was going to be a nostalgic moment with all the Penn State fans still being Eagles fans, and making a return to the city of Philadelphia was going to be so special. James Franklin implied that Howie Roseman directly told that to Saquon Barkley, which obviously is against the rules during the tampering period. And this was the direct quote of what James Franklin actually said in his statement to media, talking about that conversation he had with Saquon Barkley. And Barkley then came out afterwards, and after the media, came at Saquon and asked him, about what James Franklin said. And Saquon really just tried to clarify everything by saying that the sales pitch that James Franklin was mentioning in his conversation or in his statement was made to his agent and not directly to Saquon Barkley. His agent was the one that received that sales pitch from general manager Howie Roseman, and then he communicated it to Saquon Barkley. But again, like I mentioned before, because it was a little bit fishy there, you don't know who's telling the truth. Obviously here, the NFL found no indication of direct contact made between Howie Roseman and Saquon after looking through various communication outlets, through emails, text messages, phone calls, and stuff like that. And interviewing Nick Sirianni, Howie Roseman, Saquon, James Franklin, they found absolutely nothing. So the Philadelphia Eagles got no punishment at the end of the day, but still, technically, the NFL could reopen this investigation if more evidence is brought to light. But I don't think that'll be the case. It just seemed like James Franklin misspoke in his statement. So I think the Eagles are safe. It seems like they did everything by the book, and they have nothing really to worry about here. But where now we shift over to the Atlanta Falcons and look at their situation, Kirk Cousins just really let the cat out of the bag. Honestly, he told on himself is what I'm trying to say. He ratted himself out in his statement, talking to the press at his introductory press conference, and he just told on himself. He gave himself away by I'll pull up the quote here. He said directly in his quote there in his statement as to, why this was such a great place for him to come. He said, "There's great people here, and it's not just the football team. I mean, I'm looking at the support staff meeting, calling yesterday, our head athletic trainer, talking to our head of PR. I'm thinking we've got good people here." And it is important to mention that when this introductory press conference was being, held and he was talking, this was on the first day of free agency on, I think it was a Thursday or a Wednesday, and in his statement he said, I'm looking at the support staff meeting, calling yesterday. So if his press conference was on the first day and he said that he called yesterday, obviously that falls during the tampering period, and that was a direct violation of the rules that these free agents have to abide by. And no, Kirk Cousins isn't representing himself. He actually has an agent. So by saying he directly called the head athletic trainer, the head of PR, he just told on himself. He sold. He just ratted on himself, and it was kind of funny looking at it back now because he tried to brush it off quickly afterwards, saying that there wasn't really much there in what he said, but there quite frankly was a lot, and it is just as obvious as it could get when you read back what Kirk Cousins said. But it wasn't just that. The NFL found also some evidence that there was some tampering going on with the Falcons' acquisition of Darnell Mooney and also tight end Charlie Warner. So those specifics weren't really explained in any of the sources I found when I was looking up the information for this. So I can't talk about it, but at the end of the day, they were also found to be included in this tampering. So the Falcons were fine, and that's really what it came down to with this whole situation. But now you think about it, and this tampering and how it all worked out. Why did it take so long? I don't really have that answer, because it seems like based on the punishment, it wasn't that severe, and I think a lot of people probably would have guessed that if they didn't punish them before the NFL draft, that this punishment was going to be applied towards next year's draft, as that usually will be the case for these allegations. When something like this happens, it usually comes down to the NFL taking away a draft pick. Depending on the severity of it, it could range from a second-round draft pick or a fifth-round draft pick, like it was with the Atlanta Falcons. This one not so severe, obviously, because not to discredit the value you get in the draft with all these different rounds you get with your draft picks, it doesn't really matter too much for a fifth rounder. It definitely could have been a lot worse. And if you look back to other tampering situations that the NFL has had to deal with, the worst one was with the Miami Dolphins and their owner and just the organization as a whole, when they were allegedly involved with trying to lure in Sean Payton during that tampering period, and also making contact with Tom Brady and making direct contact with him about potentially joining their team a few years ago. The NFL obviously found the evidence to take away, I want to say, a first-round draft pick from the Miami Dolphins, and also fine Chris Greer a lot of money for the Miami Dolphins in and of itself. So that's as bad as I've seen it get, taking away a first-round draft pick from a team. Obviously, this was a slap of the wrist, really, for the Atlanta Falcons. Not too severe, but, it is a punishment, technically, at the end of the day. So the Falcons will have to deal with that. They haven't tried to push back on it. They've accepted all that the NFL is handing down to them. So that is where this situation sort of ends now. People I've seen on other social media platforms have been pretty angry or just annoyed that the punishment wasn't, I guess, more severe, or that the NFL took way too long to just take away next year's fifth-round draft pick, and that it should be a little bit more severe. But for a situation like this, I don't think it probably should be, just because, again, it was only a day before, and it's not like it's been going on for a year or two while Kirk Cousins was really still under contract, like Tom Brady, Sean Payton situation with the Miami Dolphins. That situation was going on for a year or two, according to reports. So this one was just pretty much in the moment during the same time frame of free agency to the tampering period. So that's why I think it wasn't so severe and why the NFL really couldn't do too much past this. I think anything greater than a third round draft pick taken away from the Falcons would have been too much. So I think they found a good medium here, and now the NFL can move on. These two teams can move on from it unless something else pops up, which I highly doubt that it does. This case is pretty much closed, and that will wrap up this segment for us on this show. Now we're gonna head to a quick break, and actually, hold on. We have some breaking news. Okay, I got it now. All right, that was just me freaking out because we got some breaking news. Trevor Lawrence and the Jacksonville Jaguars have agreed to a 5-year, $275 million extension, $142 million guaranteed, according to Ian Rappaport. Let me do the quick math there just to see what we're working with here. 275 on a 5-year deal, $55 million per year for Trevor Lawrence and the Jacksonville Jaguars, tying him for the highest earning contract in the NFL currently, tying him with Joe Burrow. So, yeah, that was some breaking news there. I was not prepared for that at all. I really messed that up. But that is that. We're going to go to a quick break, and when we return, we're going to come back and talk about Travis Kelce and him talking about his future in the NFL. He's on a new contract extension, but he talks about life past that and how much he has left in the tank. We're going to get to more details on that situation when we return. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. And before we jump into our third segment, I really messed up that last one. I was freaking out about the contract extension given out to Trevor Lawrence just now. I don't get a chance to use the breaking news part of this system, so that really got me excited. $55 million per year for Trevor Lawrence. That's going to create a lot of discussion. I had Emran and Kenneth on here, other hosts of podcasts on here on the GSMC Sports Network, and I think Trevor Lawrence was the one we least expected to get an extension this massive, but he is tied down for the next 5 years with the Jaguars, and he becomes tied for first for the highest earning quarterback contract in the NFL. I can't wait to talk about that more tomorrow, but for right now, we're going to continue on with the segment I just mentioned. Travis Kelce speaking on his NFL future. Recently, Travis Kelce signed an extension with the Kansas City Chiefs to stay with the team for the next 3 seasons. He is 34 years old right now, and as the mandatory minicamp starts for the Kansas City Chiefs this week, and Kelce's back out there competing, being there with his teammates for another season in the NFL. He talked to the local media there after practice and just discussed his future a little bit, saying, obviously, I know that there's opportunities outside of football for me, and I think you have to keep in perspective that I'm still a little kid when I come into this building, and he said he's just playing it by ear. He'll play until the wheels fall off, were his exact terms. In those comments he mentioned there with the media after practice this week. And you look at Travis Kelce now, and his trajectory, it has still been pretty steady and pretty steadily exceptional for a tight end now heading into 34 years old and being closer to the end of his career than the beginning of his career. Obviously, you would have expected maybe a dip or at least a plateau. I guess it has plateaued, but right at the top, still performing very well for the Kansas City Chiefs and for his age. The stats don't really show any decline in him, like I mentioned, too much. He was 16 yards shy of his 8th consecutive 1,000-yard season this past year in 2023. Before that, he had 7 consecutive, obviously, 1,000-yard seasons. That was the record for tight ends in NFL history, 4 consecutive 1,000-yard seasons with 7. And he had 984 yards last year. That was his lowest since 2015. So it really just shows that from that point on, and especially when Patrick Mahomes came into the league, he just really took his game to another level. He was decent back then, 2015, 2016, but he really took it to a whole different level. One where I don't think a lot of people had it penciled in that he would realistically reach these heights, especially playing this late. But when you have a quarterback like Patrick Mahomes, they could definitely extend your career like it has Travis Kelce, and also congratulate to his own merit and for how well he has produced and just gotten better over the years. That definitely holds its own weight. But now we're sort of starting to see him perform better, maybe not in an entire regular season or just projecting more into these next years of this extension. Where I'm sort of projecting him to be at is maybe his numbers in the regular season go down because you want to keep him healthy, you want to keep him playing as long as possible. But in the postseason where you really make your money and cement your legacy, this past postseason he played as good as he's ever had in any postseason in his career. He had a total of 32 receptions for 355 yards and 3 touchdowns in this postseason. 11 receptions for 116 yards in just the AFC Championship game, and then 9 receptions for 93 yards in the Super Bowl. So if Travis Kelce, now talking about this future and what I sort of envision him transitioning into, seeing now not so much being this dominant figure in the regular season, but maybe transitioning to being this late season performer where you not load manage, because I don't think you could really do that in the NFL, but if you could just preserve yourself, maybe not go too crazy in the regular season, and people will look at his stats and think, oh, he's really slowing down, or he's not the same Travis Kelce. But if you continue to perform like this in the postseason, that's really honestly what it comes down to and what really matters at the end of the day, because they're on the brink of history right now, chasing that three-peat. Never been done in NFL history, and of course this season maybe has more pressure than any other season just because you are right there on the brink of history, but at the same time, if you can achieve that, then I don't think anybody's going to make a big deal about, oh, he didn't do that well in this regular season. It won't really matter if they do go out and win the Super Bowl, and if he is as dominant as he was in next postseason, this coming one, than he was in this past one. I think that'll just continue to build his legacy, build his resume, and again, nobody will really care if his regular season wasn't up to par, unless it's really bad. Again, it won't make a difference. And then Travis Kelce continued on with more quotes, and now this will lead into my next question I have about Travis Kelce and the Chiefs. He said, seeing where the team is now, you have to find a way to play your best from this point on, all the way, hopefully, till January and February. And that, again, sparks my next question, and what I'm really wondering what this development will be like for not only Travis Kelce heading towards the end of his career, but with the Kansas City Chiefs as well, because you expect Patrick Mahomes to have a good amount of time left in him. And where do the Chiefs look now to find that next reliable weapon other than just Travis Kelce? Because if it goes according to plan how I'm thinking of it, and maybe you don't rely too much on Travis Kelce in the regular season, you're still going to need someone to step up for you and sort of develop into that go-to guy for Patrick Mahomes. If it doesn't have to be Travis Kelce, of course, that relationship will still be there with Kelce, but I think now is an optimal opportunity where you have a window now with Travis Kelce on probably his last extension with the Chiefs to find somebody and still have that security blanket in Travis Kelce, because the last thing you want to do, like a lot of teams do with their quarterbacks and other positions of high significance, is they wait until they're finally out the door and then they try over and over and over again and fail over and over and over again to find that next guy. And that's where you get very much these dip in performances, these droughts of no playoff success, very bad regular seasons, and no team really has a backup plan or a game plan for life after this generational type of player. Now, I think the Chiefs are presented with a great opportunity to try and find that guy, and it doesn't have to necessarily be another tight end. That's where some of these wide receivers come into the picture, and where I think in years past with these receivers, they've had a few now that have sort of come in and sort of have been, let go of, have been shown the door in this Patrick Mahomes era with Travis Kelce. Not for anybody's fault, but I think because Travis Kelce is so great, he really deserves to be that number one option, and it almost seems like there's not enough room or not enough balls to go around for two guys to be that alpha and that number one in there. You look at the recent history, just in this Patrick Mahomes era, you've had Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill obviously moves on. Then you have Travis Kelce and Mecole Hardman. Then you transition again to Travis Kelce and Rashee Rice, who had a pretty decent year last year. And now you bring in Xavier Worthy and draft him. Maybe he could step into that number one role. Or you could have sort of a dynamic duo there with Worthy and Rashee Rice. That could be another option. It doesn't have to just be one guy. Maybe you have two receivers here that could take you into the future, and also throwing in there Marquise Brown as well. I think maybe they could transition that way, and they have a great opportunity now that I think not enough people are talking about, and that they really have to take advantage of, because like I mentioned before, you don't want to find yourself in a situation where you have arguably one of, if not the best quarterbacks in NFL history, and you're struggling to find his next go-to guy, all this support around him, and you're constantly disappointing season after season, where Patrick Mahomes now is pretty much in his prime. It seems like he has been in his prime throughout his entire time in the NFL, but you don't want to find yourself in a situation where you're scrambling, trying to find solutions where you don't really have the right mindset to, because you're sort of desperate to find one. That's my biggest question now, after Travis Kelce sort of brings up this topic of maybe being closer to retirement after his contract extension is up. This could be very helpful for the Chiefs if they play it outright. In an ideal world, you get that three-peat, you continue to have decent success with Travis Kelce, even if you don't win Super Bowls after this year. But those other guys develop into very solid, very good, elite number one receivers, and you can make that transition very seamlessly after Travis Kelce has moved on. That is ideally what would happen, but we'll see how it all plays out in the end. Nothing really goes according to plan in the NFL. There's always twists and turns and audibles you have to make, so that's ideally what would happen, but we'll see how it all ends up. Comment here from Beth. I hope I'm saying this right. Beth, Bears fan. Hi to you as well. But we're going to move on from this topic, and we're going to head into another quick break here. When we return, we're going to talk about two other topics, some more running back rankings in the AFC North this time. Very, very stacked running back group in this division. We're going to talk about that, and also talking about second overall draft pick Jaden Daniels and how he's adjusting to the Washington Commanders, and how he could potentially mask the limitations I see at wide receiver for them. Is he up for the challenge? We're going to talk about it in just a few seconds. Don't go anywhere.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC. to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Jumping back into the show, and now going to go into our running backs ranking segment of today's episode. Like I mentioned, we're going to go to the AFC North and discuss what we're looking at in this division. In my opinion, the best division in the NFL. I think it has the highest quality of teams, just from 1 to 4. I think it's hard to find another division that has all of its teams constantly in playoff contention, and not just that, just playing at a high level. Great quarterback play for the most part, and the running backs are probably the best group out of all the position groups in this division. So we're going to jump straight into it. At number 4, we have the Cincinnati Bengals. Why the Cincinnati Bengals? Well, you have Zach Moss there on your left, the first time being in a Cincinnati Bengals uniform this year, and to your right, you have Chris Evans. Chris Evans was a rookie last year, and not to mention that he didn't perform too well as a rookie. There's just a lot of uncertainty with this group that I think they just tried to patch this group together because they moved on from Joe Mixon, or they traded him away to the Houston Texans. Shots below the belt. The loss of Joe Mixon was big. Exactly. It was massive for this team because Joe Mixon, if he doesn't get the credit that he probably deserves around the NFL, he was a very massive piece for this offense to at least find some bit of balance with what they were working with, because offensively you have T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, and Joe Burrow making every throw seem very easy. With Joe Mixon, that brought a little bit of surprise, I guess, a surprise element to this team where it wasn't just all pass, and also with this offense almost seeming one-dimensional now because you don't know what you're going to get out of Zach Moss and Chris Evans as your two lead guys. It almost puts Joe Burrow, I don't want to say more of a risk or in danger or something like that, but if he's always throwing, it just gives the defense more of an opportunity to hit him, and you don't want to go away from that because that obviously gives you your best opportunity of winning. But at the end of the day, if you can't rely on the running backs or this offensive line, you're almost left with no choice, and you have to run that risk of still trying to perform very well because you have two great wide receivers, but no running game could make you very one-dimensional, and Joe Burrow has already suffered a lot of injuries. It's a very delicate situation with the Bengals. I don't want to discredit what Zach Moss and Chris Evans could do, but we just haven't seen it up until this point, and I don't think anybody could rightly, confidently say that they're just going to walk in seamlessly and produce a 1,000-yard rushing year in this offense. I'm going to have to see it to believe it, basically. So that's why they come in at number 4. And at number 3, we'll stay in Ohio and go over to the Cleveland Browns. Nick Chubb and Jerome Ford, a very positive surprise and very good find here in Jerome Ford. I'll start with him there on your right. He stepped up very nicely for Nick Chubb when he went down just 2 games into the season. He finished with 813 yards, 4 touchdowns, and also tacked on 319 receiving yards as well. As a team, last year, you could pretty much say just Jerome Ford leading this backfield. As a team, the Cleveland Browns finished 12th in total rushing yards with just above 2,000, and also in yards per game with 118.6, which isn't bad, but it really just makes you anticipate more the return of Nick Chubb and seeing what this team could be when you have Nick Chubb in there, because he quietly has been one of the best running backs since the time he got drafted. He has had basically a 1,000-yard season in each year in the NFL of his total 6 years, talking about Nick Chubb. And if it wasn't for some of these injuries that he has suffered, and if he had stayed healthy this past year, he was well on his way for another 1,000-yard season. I would like to see more in the receiving game from this backfield, but just basically running it and just grinding other teams down. I think they do it a lot better than a lot of teams in the NFL, and they also have the depth behind these two guys with Dante Foreman, Naheem Hines, also a solid group there of four with these two guys really leading the backfield. I think they could expect big things from them. Their offensive line is very good. And also, not to continue to talk about Deshaun Watson, but you don't really know too much of what you're going to expect from him. So relying on two very good runners in 2024, I think, is the way to go for the Cleveland Browns and the path to success for them as well. But they're not number two, and they're not number two because the Pittsburgh Steelers have two great running backs as well, but they add a different dimension with that man you see there in the middle of your screen. That would be Justin Fields. And before I touch on Justin Fields, I want to mention that the Steelers finished right there, very close to the Cleveland Browns as a group there, rushing the ball. They finished 13th in both rushing yards, total rushing yards, also just above 2,000, and 13th also in yards per game at about 118, similar to the Browns or exactly as the Cleveland Browns. And pound for pound, running back for running back, Nick Chubb compared to Najee Harris, and then you have Jerome Ford compared to Jaylen Warren. Very similar in terms of yards. Najee Harris, starting with him, he has had also a 1,000-yard season in about every year in the NFL. Hasn't been in the NFL as long as Nick Chubb, but is on that same trajectory to average 1,000 yards in each year he has been in the NFL. You have that, and he also had, or both of them had 7 touchdowns each in the first 2 years. Oh, this being just Najee Harris, 7 touchdowns in each of his first 2 years, and 8 touchdowns last year as well. Not so much involved in the receiving game like he was during his rookie season, but that is, at least you've seen it already with Najee Harris, so that's a positive. And then you have Jaylen Warren, who had a massive jump in his second year, 379 yards in his first year, jumping all the way up to 784. 1 touchdown in his rookie season to 4 last year, and then he also increased his production in the passing game. So you can only really expect him to continue to grow with this 1-2 punch that they have with Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. They have to figure out the contract situation with Najee because they didn't pick up his 5th-year option. So that's something that they still have to work out. But like I mentioned before, the X factor is now that man you see there in the middle. And I know he's not the starting quarterback right now. That is presumed to be Russell Wilson. But this is something that adds to this offense that Russell Wilson just can't bring to you. If you add Justin Fields and you make him your starter, you add basically another running back there that has a great arm and is obviously your quarterback, but his rushing ability is second to very few in the NFL. If you just look at Justin Fields over the last few years, or just last year, he produced 657 yards rushing, 4 touchdowns on 124 carries. He was the Chicago Bears' leading rusher last year in that offense, probably the catalyst to make everything work. And obviously, he still has to win the job, but the potential of seeing these 3 back there in any sort of set or formation and not knowing where the ball is going to go, that is super dangerous for opposing defenses to be so disciplined and so just dedicated to staying in their holes and making sure they're well aware of where the ball is. It's going to be a nightmare if this ever does happen this year. But the potential is really just off the charts there for this team. If this were to happen, I think it would be just as dangerous as the number 1 ranked team I have on my team. The Steelers don't have enough to exceed the Baltimore Ravens, who basically have the exact same situation as the Pittsburgh Steelers, but at a better quality. We've seen it already in the NFL with Lamar Jackson basically doing exactly what Justin Fields could potentially do with the Steelers. He has been that entire offense. The offensive scheme and system is just built around Lamar Jackson and his ability to run. He has grown a lot as a thrower, but his rushing ability is just exceptional. This Baltimore Ravens team last year as a group finished first in the NFL in total yards at over 2,661, and also first in yards per game, averaging 156 yards per game last year. And you take those phenomenal numbers and then you add probably one of the best running backs in the NFL in Derrick Henry. The thought of him, just him and Lamar Jackson back there, is going to be a nightmare, but I think the man over here to your right, Keaton Mitchell, really showed up late last year to the party and to this Baltimore Ravens offense, but in the short amount of time there, he really impressed me because I think he brings a different dynamic than all the other running backs that they had. They obviously moved on from Gus Edwards. J.K. Dobbins didn't really work out because he was always injured. Now you bring in a very powerful, very one-cut sort of running back in Derrick Henry, whereas with Keaton Mitchell, he's very shifty, very agile, super fast, and you add him to also Lamar Jackson, who also is a nightmare to tackle. That's just going to create so many headaches for this team, and this Baltimore Ravens team might not throw the ball more than 10 times per game, honestly, with this running back group that they have in Mitchell and Henry, and also Lamar Jackson being able to run it. It's going to be scary coming into 2024 for anybody that can find a way to stop them. I'd love to know how they do it, but I don't think many teams will be able to stop this running back group, this rushing attack that the Ravens have going. And it's exciting if you're a Baltimore Ravens fan. I unfortunately am not, so I'm not going to be looking forward to those games. But all in all, the Ravens do top my list on the running back rankings for the AFC North. Let me know what you guys think about it in the live chat box or also in the comment section afterwards. If you agree with my order, if you agree with the players I expect to play a big role in these running back groups, leave it all, like I said, in the comments down below. But we're going to go to the final break of this show, and when we return, we're going to talk about the second overall pick, Jayden Daniels. How's he doing so far through the offseason, and can he have enough talent within him in his first year, might I add, to cover up some of the wide receiver limitations I see with this Washington Commanders team? I'll talk about that more in just a few seconds. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back here now to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to talk about our final segment on today's show. We're going to look at Jayden Daniels because I don't think he has been talked about too much this offseason. I wanted to check in on him and give you guys an update on how he's doing so far, and he was the second overall draft pick in this year's draft, so a lot of stock is being put in on him by the Washington Commanders to sort of lead them into this new era under Dan Quinn, under Cliff Kingsbury, under a new owner in Josh Harris. Now they have their franchise quarterback, and they are on the right path, but we have to see how this will all play out. Like I mentioned, drafted number 2 overall off of a Heisman-winning season. Daniels should be the starter once the regular season obviously starts, but Dan Quinn has actually said today that they haven't technically named a starting quarterback, and Jayden Daniels hasn't played too much into the hype he has been receiving from other outlets in media. He still remains pretty humble about it, saying that he isn't a superstar just yet, and he has to go out there and prove it. But in my opinion, from what I've seen so far, I don't think he has received too much coverage, at least outside of Washington and outside of that D.C. area where I'm sure that's all they talk about. But on the national level, I think it's all been about Caleb Williams, J.J. McCarthy, Drake May doing very well with the New England Patriots. I don't think I've seen too much about Jayden Daniels, so now focusing in on them for the time being. The Commanders started their mandatory minicamp this week on Tuesday, and Jayden Daniels, like actually most of these rookies, has been very impressive throughout OTAs and now heading into mandatory minicamp, wrapping that up this week, leading into training camp on a good note. Jaden Daniels has been getting some praises and some good reviews around the organization, specifically from one Terry McLaurin, who mentioned that Jaden Daniels is really prepared and that there's an open door of communication between himself and Jaden Daniels so far over his preparation and just helping him out with anything that he is able to. On top of Terry McLaurin, other receivers like Olamide Zaccheaus has said that Jaden Daniels has handled himself so far like a veteran and has been overly prepared, very hardworking, trying to learn the playbook as best as he can. That's really been the main attribute that has been attached to Jaden Daniels, how prepared he is under Cliff Kingsbury and trying to learn his system. He has been very well prepared up until this point, and also Terry McLaurin touched on him being very intentional about his workout regimen, and his arm talent obviously is off the charts. More on Terry McLaurin and how he talked about Jaden Daniels. He said, "I love getting extra reps after practice with him. We just catching the top end of the deep ball. That's big for me. I get to track the ball over my shoulder, and it's also big for him because he gets used to dropping the ball in the bucket, and so far he has made some nice plays at practice from all the reports that have been coming out of the Commanders' practices, obviously, and have also included there some design runs where it seems like the Commanders are very intentional about trying to use all of Jaden Daniels' abilities and trying to use all of his skill set to be a danger out them and just bring another dimension to this offense, because over the last few years they've had new quarterbacks come in, but I think they've lacked that superstar X-Factor ability that it's just reminding me of Madden in those X-Factor abilities you see there. But regardless of that, the ability to just be a threat on the run, like a Lamar Jackson, like all these other quarterbacks that are able to move, like a Patrick Mahomes, and those like that, will definitely help out his progression if this next problem that I bring up, which I still think is the main problem, the wide receiver limitations are a concern for me, because I think the Commanders have done a decent job of addressing most of their problems this offseason, but in the wide receiver room, I still have my doubts, just because I've talked about Terry McLaurin already, and he has been praising Jaden Daniels, but outside of him, it seems to be lacking a little bit in the ability to get open one-on-one, just having that talent to be a good number 2 or maybe a low-end number 1 receiver. I think those are big questions with the Washington Commanders. Their next best receiver last year, based on numbers and the stats that they put up, other than Terry McLaurin, was Curtis Samuel, who obviously now is on the Buffalo Bills, and he recorded 613 yards, 62 receptions for only 4 touchdowns, and that's all right. It's not great, but as a number 2 receiver, the offense overall, the Commanders overall as a team weren't fantastic, so you would take 613 yards, but at the end of the day, you're still looking for more, because you have to deal with the Philadelphia Eagles and their offense, the Dallas Cowboys to some extent also. You're a little bit unsure about them, but just across the NFC, you have a lot of great offenses that you have to compete with and put up points with. I don't think those numbers are going to cut it. And Terry McLaurin, I'm a big fan of him. I think he's very underrated, but he also needs more to kind of help him out and share the workload to make this Commanders offense as successful as it can be. And outside of Terry, you don't have too many other proven options other than Jahan Dotson, who is heading into his second year. Like I mentioned, Olamide Zaccheaus. Can he be a number 2? Maybe, but he has been so far a number 3 receiver in this offense. It's putting a lot of pressure on Jaden Daniels and his ability to sort of be that X factor and almost carry them. Is he capable of doing it? That is yet to be seen. But like I mentioned with Jahan Dotson, Zaccheaus, Damiere Byrd, Luke McCaffrey, also a lot of uncertainty in this position group, and not to mention just a lot of young guys that are still learning their way around the NFL. How successful can an offense be with so much young talent and a young leader in terms of NFL experience? How successful can that be with a lot of newness also from a new offensive coordinator, new head coach? it's still pretty much up in the air, but to answer the question, can Jaden Daniels be successful with this receiving group? I think it just depends on what you determine what success is. If you think success is just improving on the record that they had last year, I think that's very much attainable. I think they can be better, but if success is anything more than that, trying to compete for a playoff spot, I don't think they will be successful. So, sort of managing your expectations that way, I think has to be done, because this team is getting there. They're building. They are improving. I think they're the only team in that division that has improved, other than the Philadelphia Eagles. And shots below the belt, I hope Jaden Daniels doesn't get scapegoated like Justin Fields did in Chicago. That's a good point. Both of them very much similar skill sets, similar ability with how they play, obviously running the ball and being throwers of the ball, also obviously because they're quarterbacks. But I think Jaden Daniels up until now is a little bit more developed in that aspect of his game, so he does have that going for him. But again, I also share your same feeling around the situation. If he gets scapegoated for it, that'll obviously hurt his development. With so much newness coming into this season for the Commanders, it's exciting, and people want to build up these expectations. Most of them may be unrealistic. I think people have to manage those expectations and realize that without one or without two really good receivers, they already have one in Terry, but they definitely need another one, and a backfield with Brian Robinson, Austin Eckler, who will be better, but again, you're not really too sure. And that offensive line still has a lot of uncertainties as well. I've just named a bunch of things they have to work on. That's not typically what you see with a team that is competing for a playoff spot. So it's going to be exciting at some points. There's definitely going to be some bumps in the road. But I think people have to be patient with Jaden Daniels. Really give him time, because it's not as easy as it may seem at times with his skill set and being excited on Sundays to see him play. The Commanders haven't had a quarterback like this since RG3, and we all remember how that turned out after a season or two. He got injured, and then it just really fell off from there. You have another opportunity now with Jaden Daniels. Can he be successful? I think he certainly can be, but determining what success is for this group and figuring that out before will be the biggest point in all of this for the Washington Commanders. But they are on the right path. I'm excited to see them. I think they've done a great job this offseason in getting better in all aspects, but they're not quite there to compete for a playoff spot, in my opinion. But again, let me know what you guys think of Jaden Daniels and how the Commanders are building their team over there in DC. But for the meantime, that'll wrap it up for us on today's show. I want to thank you guys for tuning in to today's episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as following the network on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and X for more content. And also, if you want to see more of me and this show, check out the GSMC Sports Network channel and the GSMC Podcast Network channel on YouTube for a lot more content around the NFL for you guys to enjoy. And as a final reminder, tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more NFL discussions and football conversations with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host. Thanking you guys once again for joining me, and I hope to see you guys all back here again with me tomorrow to wrap up this week.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.